There's been many consoles launched over the last 25 years, some successful and some not so much, but not many have made the impact that the Sony PlayStation's made. 25 years since it first launched here in the UK, on September 29th of 1995, the PlayStation changed gaming forever. I've hosted a weekly retro gaming podcast for almost 5 years now, and in that time I've spoken to hundreds of developers, artists, musicians and company bosses, and they pretty much all agree the original PlayStation was a total revolution. But before the system was launched, not everyone felt that way. The Oliver twins developed lots of games on 8-bit systems like the Sinclair Spectrum, Commodore 64 and the Nintendo Entertainment System, games like Robin Hood, Ghostbusters 2 and of course the famous Dizzy series, and they were blown away by an early PlayStation demo they saw and started developing on the system, expecting that they would be early developers of PlayStation games, but were quite surprised that they weren't met with a very warm reaction by the industry at large.
But yeah, so Jurassic Park had just come out in the cinemas and they just showed this 3D dinosaur and it was just like, I've never seen anything like that. That's absolutely incredible. So we got a very early PlayStation which looked like a
dev kit.
Yeah, the dev kit looked like a huge photocopying machine. It was massive, way bigger than a PC box. And we put some demos together and we went and met some publishers and it was incredible to sort of walk into like Acclaim or somewhere and say, yeah, we're writing PlayStation because that's the new computer. And they were like, no,
Not interested.
Not interested. How on earth does a sort of TV manufacturer think that it's going to compete with Sega and Nintendo?
Wow.
Like, they know games. Like, Sony might be able to produce electronics, but it's never made a console. It's going to fail.
Some even tried to block the launch, with Atari's president Sam Tramiel threatening legal action against Sony if they were to launch the PlayStation in the US at under $300. And of course, we all know that's exactly what they did.
$299.
And Atari didn't sue, by the way. Now, we all know the roots of the PlayStation story, starting originally as a collaboration with Nintendo for the ill-fated Super Nintendo CD-ROM drive that's only surfaced as a single prototype in recent years, and of course there are many videos on that story on YouTube, so we won't dwell upon it here too much. But that of course did lead Sony to decide to go it alone and make their own console under the codename PSX in 1993. And you have to remember that before the PlayStation, gaming still had an image of being somewhat of a mostly pre-teen activity, and you had cutesy characters like Mario, and even the edgier Sonic the Hedgehog looked a bit naff to mid-90s teenagers who were then getting into their late teens or early 20s and discovering club culture and rave music. And many people feel that the PlayStation made gaming grow up, including legendary musician Tim Wright, who worked for Psygnosis and did music for the game Wipeout.
It was just a weird combination of everything coming together at the same time, I think. The developers at Psygnosis were growing up. You know, they were in the clubs, they were enjoying all the sort of things you can do in a club. I'll leave it at that. So there was that whole kind of that club culture, getting off your head and sort of you wanted to in some way continue that, you know, when you came home or do something beforehand that kind of put you in the mood.
The PlayStation suddenly made gaming cool, and it wasn't long before it made its way into nightclubs across the UK. When clubbers wanted a break from a sweaty dance floor, they could sit down and play some PlayStation, and it did actually fit in perfectly. Even the design of the console looks somewhat industrial. With its sleek lines and curves, the PlayStation rode the wave of the CD-ROM revolution and actually was the first really successful console to use the optical disc format. And this of course brought massive storage capabilities over the previous cartridge format. And of course it brought us the mysterious black disc. I remember kids in the playground at school saying the reason the back of the PlayStation CDs were black was because it made them impossible to pirate. And then, when the first CD writers became affordable, we learned that that wasn't the case at all. In fact, the black colour had no purpose at all apart from to make them look cool. And speaking of CDs, the early SCPH-1001 model of the PlayStation featured RCA phono output jacks for sound and is still collectible in the audiophile market to this day by fans who consider it to be one of the best sounding audio CD players ever made. The PlayStation was full of mid-90s attitude, and the controller had nods back to its Super Nintendo legacy, but just like it did with the games, it brought it into the third dimension. Before the PlayStation, most consoles' controllers were flat. But this ergonomic 3D pad, with its grip handles, looked totally different to anything we'd seen before. And most previous systems had letters for the fire buttons, but the PlayStation, with its simple geometric symbols, looked like something out of the future. And it wouldn't be long until we saw the addition of the 2 analog thumbsticks on the dual analog controller, and then of course the DualShock controller in 1997. And the controller is a design that some people consider the perfect controller, including, it would seem, Sony itself, as it would remain largely unchanged until the PlayStation 3, and even the current PS4 controller and the upcoming PS5 is just an evolution of this design. The early 90s was a confusing time to be a video games player, as it really did feel like a new console was coming out every week for a while, with machines like the 3DO, the Atari Jaguar, CD32, the Sega Saturn 32X, and eventually of course the Nintendo 64, all vying for our parents' hard-earned money. And I still remember seeing the PlayStation for the first time on the early 90s British gaming TV show Bad Influence, and out of all of the upcoming super consoles of that time, the PlayStation was by far the most successful, and actually became the first console to sell over 100 million units. But what made the PlayStation so revolutionary, the main thing, was the use of 3D graphics. Before the PlayStation, the ultimate goal of a home console was really 2D arcade perfection. In fact, the Sega Saturn was initially designed to excel at these kind of games. And the 2 dominant consoles, the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo, had a huge catalogue of 2D platformers and fighting games, but adding the third dimension to games suddenly changed everything. The entire industry overnight, it seemed, went 3D. But that did mean that smaller studios, who were used to making games in teams of a few people or even a single person, making a 2D cartridge or floppy disk-based game, now needed an extra army of people and to invest in new expensive hardware to render 3D models and utilise all of the extra storage space on a CD-ROM. One company that was affected was British software house the Bitmap Brothers. Known for 2D platformers and sports sims on the Amiga in particular, the transition to the PlayStation just wasn't viable for a small company.
This is when all of the bigger companies like EA started to come in. You know, the dev kits were like tens, if not more than tens of thousands of pounds. We didn't have that money.
Now, I had an Amiga 1200 at the time, and I still remember a mass exodus of games companies leaving the Amiga and concentrating all of their efforts on the PlayStation, almost instantly, and even the Amiga community were talking about selling up or buying a PlayStation to game on and keeping the Amiga for computing, and a lot of them were actually getting great imports from Japan before the official UK launch. It's often said that Doom killed the Amiga, but I think it's fair to say that the PlayStation hammered the nail in the coffin. My brother got a PlayStation for Christmas in 1995, and as soon as I saw those graphics on games like Ridge Racer, and then over the coming months games like Tomb Raider, Crash Bandicoot, Resident Evil, it was evident that this was set to be the way that video games would be from now on. And the technology inside the PlayStation was built from the ground up for 3D, striking the balance between power and affordability just right, probably thanks to Sony's track record in manufacturing and their contacts that enabled them to source components at a very low price. The 32-bit RISC MIPS R3051 is actually a workstation class CPU running at 33.8 MHz, which is a lot faster than the 7 MHz 68K that you found in the Sega Mega Drive. And the custom 3D graphics processor gave texture mapping and shading and could display up to 360,000 polygons a second at up to 480i resolution, and it really gave the PlayStation the edge. And quite unusually for the time, the system actually lacks a dedicated 2D graphics processor, and instead 2D elements in games are calculated as polygons by the Geometry Transfer engine. The console also came with 16-bit 24-channel audio, and of course could stream CD audio soundtracks directly from disc. And amazingly, they shrunk all of this hardware down from the photocopier-sized development boxes into the sleek grey plastic box that we all know and love today, that is actually smaller than an A4 piece of paper and could sit perfectly on top of your VCR in your bedroom. Now, I do remember that one thing a lot of people missed about moving from 16-bit computers over to the PlayStation was the ability to make their own games and software. It seemed like the age of the bedroom programmer was finally behind us. And then Sony answered their prayers with the release of the Net Yaroze system, which was a version of the PlayStation you could program and gave rise to a whole industry of indie games. The PlayStation obviously went on to be not only the biggest success of the 5th console generation, but also it had one of the longest lifespans of any console, getting 2 relaunches with the PS1 model in 2000 to 2006, and then being relaunched with the not so well received PlayStation Classic in 2018. But what about the original PlayStation scene in 2020? Is there new hardware and games still coming out for it today? Well, we'll have a look at that next. Now, before we do that, I just wanted to take a quick moment to give a big thank you to this video's sponsor, our very good friends at Skillshare. 2020 hasn't been the year that any of us expected, and if you're uncertain about what's next, now is the perfect time for you to learn new skills and to find a like-minded community to give you support and encouragement. And Skillshare are a huge online learning community where millions of people all come together to take the next step in their own creative journey, and they've got thousands of classes designed for creative and curious people on all kinds of topics, anything from illustration, design, photography, video, freelancing, and lots more, all in easy to digest parts. And recently I've been really enjoying the Productivity Masterclass series by Ali Abdaal. Now, it's really useful to help me get motivated and to balance my life during busy and, quite frankly, unusual times. And he really does help you work towards a happier, more productive life. And that's just one of the amazing classes that you can find on Skillshare, which is also incredibly affordable. Especially at the moment when you might be working from home, it's a great way to learn with your extra time, and a lot cheaper and a lot safer than pricey in-person workshops, with an annual subscription being less than $10 a month. But I want you to join us on our journey and become part of the Skillshare community today. So I've managed to get an amazing offer that you'll have to be quick to claim, as it's strictly limited to the first 1,000 of my subscribers. To click the link in this video's description and you will get 2 completely free months of premium membership so you can explore your creativity and passion. So claim it quick and help out this channel thanks to our very good friends at Skillshare. Now, with the resurgence of interest in retro gaming, particularly over the last decade, many systems today are seeing new releases decades after they were last on sale, with consoles like the Dreamcast and the Mega Drive, and even the Atari Jaguar having thriving homebrew scenes, with several new titles being released for them every year. Oddly though, the homebrew scene on the PS1, despite the fact that it was a much more popular console back in the day than any of those, isn't really all that active, but that's not to say that it doesn't exist and that this might change soon. And there are of course lots of Net Yaroze titles, most of which date from the system's heyday, and there is a really good 2014 collection available on archive.org of some of the best games, and I'll put a link to that in the video description. But there have been some high quality standalone releases too over the last few years, like the RPG Zia and the Goddess of Magic, released by Orionsoft in 2016. And as you can see, most of these independent games are 2D. But in the last year, we've seen the release of the PS Noob SDK, which is an open source software development kit for the original PlayStation that means you can take advantage of all of the hardware, including 3D graphic support. And there is new hardware still being made for the PlayStation today, including the PSIO, which enables you to load your games from an SD card connected to the parallel port on the back of the console. And if you want to see more about that, Neil from Retro Man Cave did a great video on it a few months ago that I'll link up in the description. And there's also the internal X-Station optical drive mod that fits inside the PlayStation and replaces the CD-ROM drive entirely. And recently we've seen the release of the PS1 digital display enhancer, which means you can connect your PlayStation's video output via HDMI to your modern television. With the original PlayStation being such a game changer, yeah, pun intended, and one of the most successful consoles of all time, I will admit it is a little bit disappointing to discover that the homebrew scene is quite inactive at the moment, but with these new developments, I'm hoping that it might kickstart it to life a little bit more over the coming years. The PlayStation celebrates its 25th anniversary here in the West next month, which not only makes me feel very old, but also has got me rediscovering what a fun system the PlayStation is again, and also remembering just what a revolution it was when it came along, and how much it completely changed the video game industry, the effects of which we still feel to this day. So if you've got any memories or stories about the PlayStation, I'd love to hear a comment off you. And all that remains for me to say is happy birthday to the Sony PlayStation. And if you've enjoyed this video, just a quick reminder, I do a weekly retro gaming podcast every week. You can get it from wherever you normally get your podcast from, or download it through the website, theretrohour.com. And while you're here on YouTube, here's another video you might enjoy. I'll see you next time.